Wars are expensive, they are destructive, they are broadly unpopular, and they kill people. Given all of that, you might expect them to end quickly. Some do. Most of the conflicts you've heard of in your lifetime did not. The Vietnam War lasted roughly 20 years. The war in Afghanistan lasted 20 years. The conflicts in the former Yugoslavia ran through most of the 1990s. Many of the wars happening right now have been ongoing for longer than some of the people fighting in them have been alive. So here's the question this episode is actually asking. Not why wars start, but why they last. Most people assume the answer is simple. Someone benefits, someone wants it to continue. And while that instinct isn't entirely wrong, it dramatically understates how complicated the real mechanism is. Because it's not usually one actor. It's not a conspiracy. It's a system. And once a war becomes a system, it develops properties that make it very difficult to stop, even when most of the people involved would prefer that it did. When a war begins, it creates demand. Not just for weapons, though weapons are the obvious part. A prolonged conflict creates demand for logistics, transportation, fuel, intelligence services, communications infrastructure, medical supply chains, private security, and eventually, reconstruction contracts. Entire economic ecosystems emerge around sustained conflict. Businesses form, supply chains develop, jobs are created, some in uniform, many more outside of it. Local economies in regions adjacent to conflict become dependent on the flow of money that war produces. This is not unique to any one country, ideology, or era. It is a structural feature of prolonged warfare. War, at scale and over time, becomes an industry, and industries rarely volunteer to disappear. Here is where it gets interesting, and where the channel's usual framework applies directly. Different actors involved in or around a war develop different incentives. The important part is that none of these incentives need to be coordinated. The actors don't have to work together to produce the same outcome. They only have to respond rationally to the incentives in front of them. And those incentives don't need to be coordinated to produce a collective effect. A politician running for office in a country at war learns that supporting the war effort is safe, and questioning it is risky. Not because anyone told them this, because the incentive structure rewards one behavior and punishes the other. A military institution that grows during wartime, in budget, in personnel, in prestige, will rationally defend the conditions that produced that growth, not through malice, through the same self-preservation logic that governs every institution we've covered on this channel. A defense contractor that wins a long-term supply contract employs thousands of people in dozens of communities across multiple congressional districts. Those employees vote. Their representatives notice. A journalist covering an active conflict has a story. The same journalist covering a peace negotiation has a much harder sell to their editor. None of these actors are villains. Each is responding rationally to the incentives in front of them. But their individual rational responses add up to a collective result. The war continues to receive the resources, the attention, and the political cover it needs to keep going. Ending a war is not simply the reverse of starting one. When a war ends, budgets shrink, contracts terminate, bases close, career paths that existed inside a wartime structure suddenly don't. Entire supply chains built around conflict need to find other customers or dissolve. The political identity of leaders who defined themselves through the conflict has to be rebuilt around something else. Peace, in other words, creates disruption. And systems, institutions, economies, political structures, naturally resist large disruptions. Not because anyone decides to resist them, because that is what systems do. This doesn't mean peace is impossible. It means that ending a war is its own political and economic project, one that requires as much energy and coordination as the war itself, usually more, because the forces resisting disruption are already in place and already organized. Declaring victory in a war that has become an industry is complicated. There are a lot of vendors to notify. The evidence for this mechanism isn't hard to find. In Vietnam, the United States remained engaged for nearly 2 decades. Costs escalated, public support deteriorated. Military objectives became increasingly difficult to achieve. Yet, withdrawal remained politically difficult. The fear of appearing to lose, combined with careers and reputations built around the war's continuation, repeatedly outweighed the evidence that continuing was not working. In the former Yugoslavia, the conflicts of the 1990s produced something that sociologists have documented in detail: war economies. Smuggling networks, black markets, local power structures that derived their authority from the conflict. The instability wasn't just a condition of those wars. It became an asset for certain groups operating within them. Ending the conflict meant dismantling the economy it had created. In Afghanistan, a 20-year engagement involved dozens of contractors, multiple governments, billions in annual spending, and an entire institutional infrastructure, military, diplomatic, intelligence, development, that had grown up around the war's continuation. When the withdrawal finally came in 2021, one of the most striking aspects was how many organizations were caught apparently unprepared for something that had been discussed for years. The war had become the default state. Peace was the disruption. Different countries, different ideologies, different stated objectives, remarkably similar incentive structures. Here is the tension at the center of this episode. Most people, in most countries, lose from prolonged war. They pay for it through taxes, through casualties, through the displacement of public spending that could have gone elsewhere. The costs are distributed broadly. The benefits, contracts, budgets, careers, institutional continuity, are concentrated in a much smaller number of organizations. This is not a conspiracy. No one designed this system intentionally, but it is a structural feature of how war economies work. The people experiencing the costs are dispersed and largely unorganized. The organizations experiencing the benefits are concentrated and very well organized indeed. This asymmetry, diffuse costs, concentrated benefits, appears in other places we've covered on this channel. It is one of the more reliable features of how institutional incentives work in practice. The lesson from all of this is not that wars are secretly controlled by a small group of powerful interests. The lesson is that complex systems produce outcomes that no single actor fully controls, and that those outcomes can persist long after the original justifications for them have faded. Wars may continue not because everyone benefits. Most people don't. They may continue because enough incentives align, across enough actors, across enough institutions, to make ending them harder than starting them. No grand conspiracy, no single villain, just incentives. And incentives can shape history far more powerfully than intentions. If this was useful, hit like. It helps more than you'd think. And subscribe if you want to keep looking beneath the headlines.